Well, guys, it's all about faith. According to Hebrews, it's all about faith. It's pretty explicit there. I think it's implicit more in the gospel. It's something that undergirds those promises. It is faith that will provide and restore the fullness of life. It is faith that will secure us now and into the future. Faith will enable us to imagine as yet unknown possibilities and to walk into them. How do we know we have faith? Is it even something to be had? For Douglas Hall reminds us, faith is actually a verb. We faith. Sounds weird, doesn't it? The Greek word that's used in the New Testament is pistis, the one that gets translated as faith. But Karen Armstrong suggests that it might be better translated as trust. She writes, faith does not require information, knowledge, and certainty, but a free surrender and a joyful bet on God's unfelt, untried, and unknown goodness. So faith is about trust and letting go, without any pre-secured guarantees, without a prenup agreement, and without fully knowing the God you trust. It suggests faith is not an acquisition, but a posture, a way of being and orienting. A willingness to be vulnerable, open to transformation. It's not something that's a process of our self-determination or our self-determining. Can't imagine much buy-in for such a notion these days, can you? Perhaps especially in the bubble of the West that we live in, because we learn early on that success is a competitive game, that resources are scarce, so we need to make best advantage of what we have, with minimal and very strategic care for our neighbour to ensure we're not overtaxed. So in light of this, I ask again, how many of us faith? It's a flimsy proposition, especially when we look around the world today, such a challenging place to live in, or at least a challenging place to live with hope, and to not to be fear-shadowed, overwhelmed. At the moment, you may or may not have realised, because you hear the gospel each Sunday, week apart, is that we're actually working through the chapter 12 of Luke. And interestingly enough, it is absolutely full of reminders not to fear, which rather suggests that the first hearers of the gospel must have had a reason to fear many things. In this chapter, we hear that wonderful thing, that wonderful piece that says, God is concerned even with the hairs of your head. Last week we heard that it was fear of an uncertain future that causes us to stash possessions and disregard the need of others. But reassuring words are offered. It isn't necessary to be anxious about life and death, or about food and clothing. These are human means of protection and well-being, but they compare little with the abundant blessing of God. Worrying about them will not make a difference in one's life or in one's death. But we do worry. We can be weighed down by all that seems hard and outside our control. So it got me thinking, and I became curious about this dis-ease, this discomfort that we experienced, all that worry, of the world as a hard place to live, of being overshadowed by the endless flow of distressing news. Now, I'm not wishing to be the proverbial Grinch, thank you, Dr. Zeus, but it is the way the world is. It has perhaps always been like this. We think we live in unprecedented times, and yet I think if we looked long and hard enough, and probably not too hard, that history would attest that we live in some repeat times, as much as we like to think we've progressed. But this is the thing. if that's the case, why aren't we simply resolved to this being the way things are? Why don't we just do that? Why does this discomfort, this uneasiness arise in us? Could it be there's something in us that imagines, that perhaps hopes, that we're not inevitably condemned to such outcomes? Is there something in us, perhaps deep and unexamined, that's just poking and nudging us a bit? What we might call a knowing in us, deep in our hearts, that things can be different, that there are other options, and we can participate in making them real. Now, it would be easy to go the whole Pollyanna way here, particularly when we're in a position of privilege. But I also have seen and known, as I'm sure many of you has, that people who live in much more challenging circumstances than us, they seem to find ways to come together and to act to alleviate the suffering of one another and to change the outcomes as far as they can make possible. We have presented to us so many realities of a world in disrepair and despair. This appears to be the way things are, how it is. But there's something about the way those stories are told to us. They're not told innocently. They are told to create a reaction in us. They are told in a way to influence. As I said, as with any human rhetoric, they are not innocent. And they are told in a way that can lead us to hopelessness, to helplessness, and to defeat. They can render us powerless before what we could almost be persuaded is the inevitable. But who decides what's inevitable? The gospel stories we tell are also not innocent texts. They are also told to influence in a particular way, and they may help balance us. Today we hear in the gospel the words in Jesus' mouth, "Sell your possessions and give alms." Audrey West, I enjoyed what she wrote. The passage challenges us with a simple test. We live lives of, do we want to live lives of taking, or do we want to live lives of giving? The answer we give reveals the truth of our hearts and opens or closes us to the blessings that God gives. So is there another way to influence the telling of the way things are? Of where we go from here and what is possible? As far as I know, the future is yet to be determined. The future will be influenced by the intention and the energy of now. A collective intention and energy that admits our vulnerability and allows that some sort of transformation is required of us, or we'll simply repeat what we know. And that such collective intention and energy can determine a future that is different from what we know. It's a kind of transformation that isn't something we acquire by dint of will, that we can grasp to achieve. Rather, it asks us to let go and to open ourselves to that deeper knowing I talked about, that's already in us, and to allow ourselves to be guided by that. To return to the words of Audrey West, the less we want to have, the less we need to have. The less we need to have, the less we need to fear. The less we need to fear, the more we know that a life of giving allows us always to live not on the brink of destruction, but on the brink of blessing. It takes courage. We absolutely need companions to discern with us and for mutual support as we trust ourselves to such transformation. And then maybe we will become, not think about, we will become the story of open-handed giving. Become people who live expectantly on the brink of blessing. And with this, we can have influence to make such thing real in our world. Who decides what is inevitable?